have that on our... All right, so I'm going to say that one more time. Tonight we are introducing Lisa, who's going to talk to us about depression and anxiety, what it was like before ACA, what it's like now, and what's helped her get through this process. And before I open it up for her to start her speech, we've got a reading that we would like to do that comes out of our big red book. And so I don't have the page number. I'm not sure why that is. If somebody has the page number for it where we have that, if you could type it in the chat, that would be great. But what it says is ACA's third step typifies our spiritual approach to the disease of family dysfunction. In ACA, we view our compulsive thinking and dependent behavior as a spiritual dilemma rather than a mental illness. We have no quarrel with science and medicine, which have made great strides in mapping and studying the brain. Such clinical work is of great importance in understanding human behavior and brain functions. We freely use such clinical labels as depression, panic disorder, bipolar, dissociation, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Some ACA members have been diagnosed as multiple personalities and as schizophrenic. We do not believe our brains are missing any elements. We start with the premise that we are whole and that we had a normal reaction to an abnormal situation of being raised in a dysfunctional home. Our normal reaction to protect ourselves has created survival traits, compulsions, and self-harming behaviors which respond to the ACA steps and spiritual remedies. We are not minimizing the severity of our situation as adult children. The disease of family dysfunction manifests itself in dependency, addiction, and dissociative personalities. The disease can kill. Every day, adult children commit suicide, die in addiction, or die one day at a time in silent isolation, thinking they are hopeless. In ACA, we believe we were born whole and became fragmented in body, mind, and spirit through abandonment and shame. We need help finding a way to return to our miracle state. Whatever mental diagnosis we may have, we seek a higher power in prayer and ACA meetings to relieve our chronic nature of feeling different. We believe God understands the root of mental health labels and freely offers help to those seeking God's love and light. We believe in a spiritual solution for the disease of family dysfunction. And at this time, I would love to turn it over to our speaker, Lisa, to share her story with us. Lisa.
Kim, thank you. You do that so wonderfully, and you're just a natural at it. My name's Lisa, and I've been in ACA for about 5 years. I live in Santa Maria, which is on the central coast of California. I haven't been a featured speaker for about 4 years, and so this is really high time. And I realized I was getting a lot of anxiety coming up to this. And so I think if I did something like this more often, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with it. So anyway, I think we all give each other grace in this program. And so I ask for that tonight myself. And thank you all for being here and showing up to support ACA as a whole. As Kim kind of mentioned, the purpose of this series is to highlight various mental health challenges and how we have found the courage to work towards better management, to live more fulfilling lives, and just to show up for ourselves. The speakers in this series volunteered as an act of service and love. We hope by telling our personal stories to foster better understanding. And perhaps some of you might identify with our struggles. The topic of depression is one that I've been interested in since my teenage years. When I was about 17, I saw the film Sophie's Choice, which was made from a novel by William Styron. The film is pretty deep and examines the historical, moral, and psychological ramifications of the Holocaust. I came to admire many of the works of Styron, and later, when he wrote his memoir on his own depression, Darkness Visible, I bought a copy, and I've referred to it over the years. I saw the film with my then boyfriend, who later went on to become my husband. I was really drawn to this boy like a moth to a flame. He was going into college and interested in a career either in history or perhaps law. I also knew I was going to college as I wanted a career in which I could support myself. And I knew that higher education was the pathway. I came from a single mother household where money was extremely tight. My dad wasn't around and didn't pay child support. My dad was an alcoholic and he left the family before I was born. He and my mom had a really troubled marriage, and my mother was a rageaholic, and so their marriage just did not work, although they stayed together for about 9 or 10 years and had 3 children. But money was really tight. My dad didn't pay child support, and my mom didn't really have much of an education. So public assistance was, what we lived on during my early years. And I can remember standing in food lines with my mom when, before the federal food stamp program went into effect. So, part of that money situation and everything always affected me. But then my mom was rightfully proud that when later on she got off of welfare and found a fairly stable clerical job. And I was proud of her too. But higher education wasn't seen as feasible or even a consideration in our family due to the financial constraints. It wasn't even thought about. And no one in our immediate family had pursued it. I was the first to go to college. And I remember rather hurtfully when I told my mom that I wanted to go to a 4-year university, and I was going to pay for it because at that time it was fairly economical. And I had a little bit of disability money because my dad had died a few years before. And so I wasn't even asking for money. And I remember my mother telling me that, she was criticizing me and shaming me because she said that, what community college is too good for you. I mean, it isn't good enough for you. And so I got a lot of that stuff all the time. And I think it was really my mother kind of projecting jealousy. But, that was kind of what I lived with, especially as I got to be a teenager and started making some of my own decisions. My whole goal since adolescence was to escape from this family and to form a life in which I didn't have to live hand to mouth and was able to have reasonable material things that having a secure income could afford. And of course, to educate myself. So when this boy, who later became my husband, was very interested and pursued me, I knew intuitively that he was the one who would support these goals. He could save money, which was a huge aphrodisiac. And he was one that I felt I could feel safe and grow. So the deal was sealed. But this relationship absolutely illustrated trait 12 for me. And trait 12 says, we are dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment and will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience painful abandonment feelings. So my first episode of depression occurred when I was in my late 20s. By this time, I'd been married for several years. While he and I loved each other, for me, there was absolute enmeshment. I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship because one had never been modeled to me. I didn't know where I stopped and another person started. At the beginning of our marriage, there had been problems with trust that I hadn't effectively healed from. But like a good little soldier, I had a goal. I was just going to carry on.
The bride's father was gone.
So I had denied that it had a lasting effect on me. Then 7 years into the marriage, the trust was again challenged. So we separated for a year. And that's when I experienced my first episode of just really severe clinical depression. It was also when I first noticed anxiety that literally took my breath away. I remember having 2 panic attacks that were the scariest things I had ever experienced in my life. One was after I got out of work. My car was parked in a multi-level parking garage, and I couldn't find it. I mean, if any of you have ever had panic attacks, it was so scary. And the other one happened in my bedroom while I was getting dressed, and I couldn't button my own sweater. My fingers were just not working right, and that scared me to death. So in my, in learning about depression and anxiety through these years, I learned that the two often do go hand in hand. A good description of depression is a persistent feeling of sadness, often a sense of loss, abandonment, and in the worst cases, absolutely no hope for the future. When I have had depression, I haven't always had pronounced anxiety. Anxiety seems to involve fear or worry that I absolutely can't control. For me, when I have had severe anxiety, the depression had always come first. And then when anxiety reared its ugly head, it was a huge warning sign to me that I absolutely needed to get help fast. Because while I may have been medicated or treated for depression, this was a new level of hell for me. The crippling fear of absolute doom is so debilitating and incredibly destructive to my already shaky sense of self-esteem. And with this comes a shame attack of the worst sort, and the feeling of being utterly defective. On page 168 of the Big Red Book, it says that shame is the #1 offender in adult children of alcoholics, and states that shame was often on the scene before abandonment. When I take a personal inventory of my life as a child and also as an adult, I see that problematic relationships that I had with my mother, my now ex-husband, and almost always authority figures had both elements of shame and abandonment. Shame leads to such overwhelming cognitive distortions about our sense of self. It's not hard to see how these distortions of catastrophizing, incredible personalization, and polarized thinking develop.
That's 10 minutes, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So I came to ACA about 5 years ago after my marriage of 3 decades crumbled. I had heard of CODA first, and I recognized that I needed the support of a group like that it provided. I realized that I had, I started reading about codependent behavior, started listening to people like Lisa Romano, and realized that I definitely was codependent. And at that time, I was for the second time in my life, I was in the deep throes of depression. And this resulted, the depression started when I separated from my husband. I hadn't yet learned about attachment styles and how in my childhood, I had certainly developed the anxious kind. From CODA, I learned about ACA. There had been both alcohol, drug use, and everyday raging in my family. The laundry list was me. It wasn't until I did the incredibly illuminating family history diagram in step 1 that I learned through interviews with my older family members that there had been a very long history of depression, both in my mother's family and then some in my father's. There was addiction definitely in both sides. Through ACA, I have found support, growth, and acceptance. I know now that most of us have what's called adult child syndrome. Essentially, the volatility and stress associated with growing up in a dysfunctional environment leaves adult children with a sense of shame and a lack of trust in themselves or others. Because their needs aren't met during childhood, they struggle with recognizing and filling their emotional needs as adults. I now know that we adult children have a higher rate of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem compared with children that grow up in non-alcoholic or severely dysfunctional homes. So some of my coping strategies that I've learned about through the 5 years that I've been in ACA are kind of learning a lot about self-acceptance and trying to not beat myself up so much because I have depression, to not think of myself as so defective, to realize that it's not normal for human beings just to have depression, but it occurs, just like diabetes occurs or other diseases occur. They happen, and there's warning signs, and our warning signs are how we were raised to with the shaming and not to value ourselves. So the coping strategies that I've learned through ACA are how to really advocate for myself by seeking medical professionals who are trauma informed. That was a big thing for me. I had gone through several therapists in my life, and it hadn't really helped me. ACA was really the first program that helped me. And through ACA, I realized that I really did need, that I was suffering from trauma and I needed to find somebody that would specifically help me. And so about 3 years ago, I found that person, and I'm still with her. She jokes that I'm her longest running patient because I've been doing EMDR with her for 3 years. And I still do EMDR with her because I still have a lot of things to unpack. I found EMDR to be really effective for me. Also, some of the coping strategies is I learned about pharmaceutical help that allows me to focus and ease some of the symptoms. I practice self-care. I have really learned how my critical inner voice and perfectionism play into these afflictions. I just put a lot of pressure on myself, an incredible amount. I'm trying to be gentle with myself, as I know that I also suffer from complex PTSD. Therefore, sometimes I have really difficult memories and feelings that I have to work through. This knowledge has made me more humble and also more empathetic towards other people. I've learned that crying is okay, that crying is energy in motion. It's freeing. It's human. Before ACA, when I cried, I always apologized afterwards profusely. And usually I would cry to my ex-husband or somebody that I felt really close to. I just thought I had to apologize. I also find through ACA, I've found mindfulness, and I've really practiced slowing down. I understand that it's okay just to sit and think and to give myself a break. I now do a regular meditation practice. I'd like to say that I do it every day, but I do it several times a week, and I do have the real goal of practicing meditation every day. In fact, today I went to a is an orientation session for a mindfulness-based stress reduction class that I'm thinking about taking. And the facilitator had stated that he believes, and a lot of other people believe, that 35 minutes of meditation every day is really critical. And I've been doing about 20, I've worked up to about 20 minutes, and I'm proud of that. But I think I'm going to start going for a little bit more. I've learned to be gentle with expectations, and also about detachment from my expectations of others. I'm keeping more regular bedtimes and prioritizing sleep time. Although I have to say that when I am suffering from anxiety, the anxiety it makes it hard to sleep. And so that's really especially distressing to me. And so I have to find a way to really get that needed sleep time in, because without it, I'm really, the symptoms of depression are more prominent if I can't sleep.
Lisa, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. I've learned how body movement, yoga, running, and hiking is not only good for confidence, but also getting into the body and to work off stored stress. I practice affirmations now almost daily. And I also try to journal about how much I've grown. I've learned to trust in safe people. And I've learned not to make repeated trips to the hardware store looking for milk. I am learning from my mistakes. So in closing, depression and anxiety is still really scary. No doubt about that. I wish it would just poof, go away. But I do have hope and courage to get me to the other side. And I know now that it won't last forever, that, you know, when I'm in an episode of depression, that I will work through it, that I do have resilience and courage to do the work to get out of that depression. I know I can live through the pain. I know I have grown more compassionate and absolutely more authentic as I learn to trust myself and others. And I know that I really love this ACA program. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. And at this time, we're going to ask that the recording be stopped. And just so everybody knows, for the recording, we're not keeping the